Thank you. Thank you. Well, and I love the lobster. We use bags and bags and bags of it every year. My neighbor, Mary, phoned me up one summer day and said, Penny, I'm having a man over to do some tree work, and at no expense to you, I want to take down the tree that's on your property, but it's by the property line. And I said, gee, why? And she said, well, it's gonna die. It's very diseased. And I said, you know, we take really good care of our trees, and I don't think anything is going to die very soon. So I said, why don't you come over and we'll take a look? So she walked me out, and we went, and it was this tree. And I looked at it, and I said, there's nothing wrong with that tree. It's a European beech. The cultivar is cristata, and it's characterized by curly leaves bunched at the branch tips. And the branches themselves are pretty bare. Here is a picture of the tree. So it's really pretty innocuous. It's small. It's not like one of these huge beech trees. It's very airy looking, but she really hated it and didn't want to see it when she walked around her yard. Oh yeah, she's a wonderful person, but I have to say that we had some daylit purple beeches, and one day we woke up and one of them was no longer there. And we were absolutely shocked. We looked around, and eventually she had had someone dig it up and move it to a different area of our property. And I said to Bob, I said, this is unbelievable. But she had put in some purple smoke bush and didn't want our day purple beech to get in the way of her purple smoke bush. So she had very distinct opinions. So we moved our beech back and said, check with us from now on. So she did check before she cut this down. And I have to tell you that this is the jewel in the crown of my husband's European beech collection. It's a cultivar from the late 19th century, and it is rare. Well, the point of this story is that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and that is true whether you're talking about fashion or plants or specifically foliage. So to understand foliage, we're going to look very briefly at some key points to consider. One is the shape of a leaf. There are chunky leaves like this. This is in my garden. It's a Magnolia macrophylla, which is the big leaf magnolia. These leaves grow to about 32 inches long over the space of a summer. They have beautiful silver undersides, and I would call that a chunky leaf shape. It's big and chunky. You can also have, like a Norway maple, for instance, has a smaller, but it's still a chunky leaf shape. Sambucus nigra laciniata, the cutleaf European elderberry, that's a very ferny texture, very finely cut, and the texture is very, very fine and soft in the landscape, as opposed to the big leaf magnolia, which has a very coarse landscape texture, which is good if you want to do a tropical area. But you can see how you can start playing with contrasts of texture. All these are green. And then we have linear leaves. This is a variegated yucca, and you can see that's pretty dramatic. So 1 or 3 of these in a border will make a really dramatic accent. Also, of course, it will look fabulous in a container. Leaf shapes contribute to texture in the garden. This is a photograph from Great Dixter, Christopher Lloyd's garden in England. I'm showing it not for the trees, but to show you the differences in texture. This is Gunnera manicata, which is not hardy here. It's hardy to zone 7, but each leaf has the potential of growing 11 feet wide. I have a picture of my husband at home standing in the center of a leaf, and he is just kind of covered over by it. In the back, you have these grasses that are very finely textured. So when you have something big and coarse in the foreground, it jumps out at you, especially if the texture in the background is fine, which it tends to recede. So that space enlarges. It's a perception. I call this my prehistoric corner because I always expected dinosaurs going to come in. This, I use a ground cover. I wanted this corner to, because it's way back, I wanted it to jump out. This is Petasites japonicus giganteus and giant butterbur. These leaves, this is early in the growing season. They eventually grow to about 16 or 18 inches across. And if you have moisture, really, really big. So I have it as a ground cover in that section with trees like bald cypress and a golden metasequoia, which is dawn redwood. This is the umbrella magnolia, which, as you can see, it's early in the season, but each leaf will grow to 24 inches long by the end of the growing season. It's another one like the macrophylla from the Appalachians. Here are mature umbrella magnolia leaves, and you can see that it gets its name umbrella because of these ribs are formed like the ribs of an umbrella. So coarse texture. What is this bizarre plant? And sometimes you can achieve big, bold textures through pruning techniques. This is one of the easiest pruning techniques of all. It's called coppicing. And you just, basically, we whack this down every fall, every September. And what happens is we interrupt the reproductive cycle of the tree. Paulownia trees would be about, 40, 45 feet tall. But by interrupting its reproductive cycle, all that plant's energy go into making massive shoots and massive leaves because it's a survival thing. You know, they want to have as much area getting sunlight as possible, so the leaves become huge. I measured this particular leaf, and it was 31 inches tall and 33 inches wide. So I have this at the corner of my driveway and the main road, and it is one of the big conversation points in my neighborhood. People always come out, what is that? Oh, are you going to plant that tree again? I say, oh yeah, it'll come up, and it comes up in May. The leaves open once it starts coming up, but it doesn't leaf out as early as other plants because you have to get the shoots activated first.
And you don't let it bloom.
Never.
Doesn't that have beautiful purple
It has
flowers?
gorgeous purple
flowers,
clusters of flowers. And it's really easy if you travel in Maryland or in Delaware and you go to a park. It's self-sown all over that area because it's warm. And it's actually down there kind of invasive. So you just pick up the seed pods in the park. They're huge, and you plant them. And we started coppicing when it was about 2 to 3 years old. And this is what a coppice stump looks like. This has been in our garden for many years. We've been in our house for 20 years, and this has probably been there 18 or about 18 years. So all this green stuff is climbing hydrangea, which we're growing as a ground cover right there. But I want to point out to you, you can see later in the season, the plant gets so huge because I initially grow it as a shrub. It gets so huge that it starts. So what I do is I cut it down to 3 shoots. Those 3 shoots then get all the energy. They can grow up to 20 feet tall in one summer. And then here, once I let it stay in for 2 years because I wanted to experiment. And so this is how thick and woody the 3 trunks that I chose that year got. So they're really fun, easy things you can do to get bold texture. Another way to prolong interest is to choose the plants you put in your garden very, very carefully. This is Katsura, Cercidophyllum japonicum. Now this is not foliage. I love this slide so much. I just had to show you the flowers. This is at Chanticleer, which is called a pleasure garden, and it certainly is my favorite ornamental garden anywhere to visit. It's in Wayne, Pennsylvania. Go if you have a chance. This is a female. I think you can see the trunk there. This is a male Katsura. They went into bloom at the same time. Usually Katsuras bloom red, but this one, the male, is blooming yellow, and the horticulturalists at Chanticleer don't really know why, but it's just the way it is. So I think that's really extraordinary, and it gives you a great idea. I took this slide. We have a weeping Katsura in the front yard. I took it, here you can see the faded flowers. They're very strappy. They have strap-like leaves. And I took this as the leaves were fading. So they open up. Last year they opened up this incredible reddish bronze, and they had little lime green outlines. It's amazing. Often they open olive green flushed with red. So you never know, but what I do know is that it's wonderful to look at. This is the tree in summer. I have trained one weeping branch over a little auxiliary path right there, and I snip up the little hanging branches when they start hitting me in the face. But it's got a beautiful habit, this weeping one. I have 3 Katsuras at home, all different cultivars. This is the color that Katsura gets in fall. It's a golden apricot. I have a little story here about Mary again. One day, this tree she did not try to take down. But one day, I walked out of my house for an early morning walk with the dog. And it was a fabulous fall morning, warm and sunny. And I took a deep breath. and I smelled fresh muffins, and I thought, and Mary's house is right across the driveway, so I thought, oh my goodness, Mary's baking muffins. I may have to stop by later. I didn't do it though. And the next morning I come out to walk the dog, and the same thing happened. And I'm thinking, okay, this is odd. She usually doesn't bake. There are just 2 of them in that house, and so she typically doesn't bake every day. The 3rd time this happened, I thought, no, this is something around me. And I started sniffing everything. And I went up to the weeping katsura, and the foliage was exuding this kind of burnt marshmallow, fabulous odor. I couldn't believe it. I picked some of the dead leaves off the ground. They too, some of the ones that had recently dropped. So that is an added bonus of a well-established katsura, is you have this fragrance in the autumn. I want to talk about color because color really has a lot of clout in a garden. It can make or break some gardens, and so you have to use it wisely. This is Aurea pendula, a European beech, and it has the longest lasting gold color of any of the beeches that are gold. But here is the thing about a lot of plants that start the season yellow. They fade over time. One thing I love about this, is, doesn't that look, the outline of that, look like the cat in the hat from Dr. Seuss? And here it is. This is May, this is October. So it's dramatically different. Same plant, same year. By sometime in July, you'll notice that the plant has pretty much greened up. So we also planted this in shade, partial shade, to help it keep its color longer. But the color when you plant it in shade is not as yellow, it's more of a lime. This is Picea orientalis skylands. It is a fabulous small tree. One of the things I love about this plant, or any Picea orientalis, it's a great conifer, is that if you touch it and hold it, it's soft. Unlike other spruces, such as the Colorado blue spruce, if you hold it, but this one, you can squeeze it, and it's really soft and feels really good. Skylands in the spring, the entire new growth, everything is yellow. As the season progresses, and even through the winter, the interior of the needle becomes the beautiful, dark, rich green of Picea orientalis, but the tips stay gold. As opposed to a 25-foot tall at maturity skylands, this is Tom Thumb. You can see the hand there, and here's the new growth. It grows at maturity to about 10 inches tall and 12 inches wide. Perfect for rock gardens and the front of borders. It is a really charming and sturdy little plant once it's established. So we're talking about fabulous gold foliage. You cannot beat tiger eyes. Cutleaf staghorn sumac. Now I'm talking about sumac like the kind that grows over on the highways and everything. And this also has a nice fall color of gold to red. depending. But all season long, it maintains this. There's a designer in Pennsylvania, Allentown, called Kirk Brown. You might know him, Cameron, but this is his garden, and he's planted it on a barrier, a big berm that separates his home from the highway. It's a great usage for it, and here's why. Like any sumac, it wants to colonize. So here's a plant, here's a plant, here's a plant, and behind this, here's a plant. Just in this area, the roots send out these long runners, and then they come up and you've got a new plant. So this is not a plant to put right up by the house. However, here is a great way to use it. I took this slide at Longwood Gardens, and they have it as the thriller plant in containers. And I think that is brilliant. The sumac, of course, has those long tropical leaves with the dangling leaflets. And in large containers that eliminate the question of the roots, it's beautiful right on a patio.
Did they take them out in the fall?
That I don't know. A lot of these botanical gardens just dump them. Yeah, I visited Mount Cuba when Mrs. Copeland was living there, and it was after her spring bulb display, and there was a compost heap of all the bulbs, which, I mean, they could have planted it or done something with, just daffodils and everything, just in this massive compost heap. So I think that a lot of these places just trash them. Or with something like that, they may give it to staff. I think staff sometimes get them. Some of you may have this in your yard. It's sassafras. I love this plant for two reasons. One is, where else on one twig, one green twig, can you find three completely different leaf shapes? There's a mitten, a trident, and a lance. The other reason I love it is because of this luminous yellow fall color. It's beautiful. But there's another caveat with this plant. Whoops. And that is, it's a colonizer. So once it's established, it's going to want to colonize a large area, which will ultimately become very shady. It's a very small tree, but it just goes and goes and goes. It's very hard to establish also. My husband and I, people offered us, here, dig up whatever you want. So we would dig and dig. We couldn't get anything established until we found one that had been grown from seed in the container. And then we've established it, and now it's growing up everywhere, but we love it. This is also at my house, and I want to show you just because of this great buttery yellow fall color. I wouldn't necessarily recommend using it now. It is the golden European ash, and ashes are having all sorts of challenges, but we actually bought this as a whip, which is an unbranched rooted cutting. We bought it 22 years ago, and we moved to New Hampshire 20 years ago. We dug up the whip, put it in a pot. We lived in the Exeter Inn. My husband was transferred here. We lived there for several months, and then when our house was ready and the soil warmed up, we put it in the ground, and this is it now. I love this plant. I can honestly say I've had no problems, knock wood.
Did you get last year's canvas?
Nope, nope. It has just been fabulous, and it is totally reliable for this color. But the other reason I love it is that once those leaves drop, all the new growth, those stems, are yellow, and they have big, black, velvet-looking buds. So they're really, really beautiful. Let's see. Ginkgo. We all know ginkgo. It's a dinosaur plant. It's been around for millions of years. The fan-shaped leaves, and it's beautiful and blue-green. Here it is in the fall. It's luminous. This great, rich yellow color. This is from my garden. We didn't have room for a big ginkgo, but we grow the cultivar called witch's broom. Tom Thumb that I showed you is actually a witch's broom from Skylands. And this is a witch's broom off a regular ginkgo. Ginkgos are deciduous conifers, and conifers, like Tom Thumb and this, they get genetic mutations that can be cut off by plant enthusiasts and conifer lovers and growers and rooted, and then they can be multiplied through tissue culture.
What makes it a ginkgo? I mean, a conifer?
Naked seeds. And I think they have naked seeds. And so the bald cypress and the metasequoia, the dawn redwood, those also are deciduous plants. They drop their leaves like the ginkgo, but they're conifers too. And another beautiful plant, but bigger, is the one I just showed you is about 3.5 feet high and 4 feet wide. This is the rosemary willow, Salix elaeagnos angustifolia. And if you look closely, it really looks like a giant rosemary plant. This blue-green foliage. It stays about, you can keep it smallish, about 10 by 10, if you coppice it every 2 to 3 years. Just cut it down, prune it hard back, and if you don't, and you want something larger, the tree itself would be about 25 feet tall. And this is a hedge of Salix elaeagnos in the fall. And you see again, that's Millennia sky racer, by the way, that beautiful grass. This is back to my garden. And I have done what I consider one of the big garden no-nos. However, it is attractive. But this is a purple beech, which ultimately will grow about 50 feet high and wide. And if you have been to the mansions in Newport, where they grow them at the end of the driveway near the road, and they're allowed to just expand, they are stunning. But on a suburban property like mine, where we have 1.25 acres, the last place it should be planted is right by the house. Because, and this is my beloved Stewartia, pseudocamellia. My favorite, well, you're going to hear lots of things are my favorite, but this is, while I look at this slide, this is my favorite plant.
Are they hardy here?
Stewartia?
Yeah.
Oh, totally.
Really?
Oh my God, they're wonderful. Yes, here it is in the fall. And the purple beech has now turned a blackish green with red tints. But the Stewartia has come alive, and it is, it's a 4-season plant because it has this fabulous bark that's all mottled, and it's shades of cream and tan. The summer foliage is nice, but the flowers are exceptionally beautiful. They have big gold bosses in the center and bright white large petals. And then, of course, the fall color is stunning. So it's 4 seasons.
How big does it become?
Oh, at the most 30 feet. So it's really a small flowering tree, but it flowers later than most spring blooming trees. And here's why I don't like purple beeches planted by the house or any tree that's going to grow big and dark, because look, it swallows that house. The house is literally swallowed in the blackness of the foliage. So before you plant, I want to show you the goods and some of the downsides so that you can strategize before you plant your trees and shrubs. The great part of the one at my house is that it silhouettes the other garden, the garden in front of it. But here, that's not such as interesting a garden, and you just have blackness encroaching upon the house. Here's a good way to use dark purple right by the house. This is Ficus sylvatica. The cultivar is Purple Fountain, and it's a living sculpture. The branches cascade, and some of them turn up at the tips. Even in the winter, you're going to have the structure of this plant, which is absolutely beautiful, and it's not going to get very tall. It'll be maybe 25 feet tall and 10 to 15 feet wide at the widest. So it looks terrific here, planted as the focal point in the front of this landscape. Another use for these purple shrubs, I'm going to show you a substitute. This is crimson pygmy barberry, and if I'm not mistaken, that's banned now. Japanese barberry is banned, but you can use something like Weigela Midnight Wine, which with a little bit of pruning stays really dense. And I know here at Rolling Green you sell several kinds of dwarf Weigelas, but it makes a wonderful edge to a shrub border, or you can plant these small ones like a purple leaf perennial as a specimen. So there are many ways to use woody plants that you don't always think about. This is at Tower Hill, and here, this is a berm, and this part of it is Rhus aromatica grollo. It's when that spreading nature of sumac can be really useful as a ground cover. Grollo, this is fragrant sumac, so it's a different species, and this only grows 2 feet high, and it is wonderful for covering banks. And look at that fall color. Okay, another favorite tree, Franklinia. I love the Franklin tree. It was discovered in Georgia along the Altamaha River in 1765 by John and William Bartram, and they took seeds back to Philadelphia and they propagated this plant, and after a while this tree actually died out. It became extinct in the wild, but the ones that the Bartrams grew existed. So all Franklinias today descend from the Bartram trees. And we planted a couple. One we put over on the side and didn't pay any attention to it, and the other we put in an irrigated raised bed so it would always look beautiful, and we killed it. But the one that we did nothing to still lives. And this this is the strange part. I took this November 8th, and it still has its colored foliage, and it's blooming. It blooms really late. But because we just shoved it off, ours endures much hardship, and it comes into bloom super late. Here's a bud, big, white, beautiful bud. This, you can see the flower is past, but I just thought it was interesting to see, depending on your little microclimates, you can have things blooming very late. And it does. Mine gets this purple and red color. The two greatest Franklinias I know around here are at Prescott Park at the entrance to the walled garden. Beautiful. And they typically bloom in around September. So late summer, early fall. Okay, this is my absolute favorite tree. This is Oxydendron arboreum sourwood. It's native to the eastern U.S. And I love this tree for, first of all, its foliage. It is very substantial. It has a wonderful, I find it very sensual. It's shiny, it hangs and dangles. It's just beautiful, shiny dark green. And then these flower clusters with the little bell-like flowers that dangle down. Do you know what happens when they become seeds? They flip over, they turn up, and the whole thing turns light green, and the little bells raise up on the stems. It's awesome. And then in the fall, you see how it's held, the flowers are held above the foliage? So you can see them really easily all the time and in all the stages, because the light green seeds, they are much lighter than the foliage, and then they turn buff in the fall. So here's another reason I like this plant. That's its fall color with the afternoon sun coming through it. This is the tree in my garden. And I don't know if you can see it here, but they start out a very dark purple, and then they get redder and redder as the season progresses. So this is the end of October. This, again, is the sourwood, and there are those buff-colored seed pods dangling down. So they're ornamental even through fall, and they stay on after the foliage has dropped. Behind there, you can vaguely make out there's a purple fountain beech, that real sculptural thing. This is a heartthrob, a pink Coosa dogwood. It has great fall color. Here is that little ginkgo I told you about, the witch's broom. And you can see how it looks in the landscape, this big golden swath of color. I have to credit the condo complex behind my house. It's invasive Norway maple. But I will say that in the fall, I borrow their fall color, and it enhances my garden. Here's one of the taxodiums, the bald cypresses. And here, just to show you how different microclimates and sun can do, this is the back one, and it has its fall color. Same plant as this, but it's still green, the one in front. Disanthus cercidifolius is an absolutely beautiful shrub. It's a modest shrub in the sense that it is very twiggy. It grows about 6 feet by 6 feet after a long time. Once it's established, it does very well. I bought 2 of them, and the first one, I bought them here, and the first one I planted, I put out in the sun, and it died right away because I did everything wrong for that plant. The second one came back, got another, planted it in the back, in the shade. or partial shade, and it thrived. It likes moisture. I kept it moist rather than, initially I had planted it under the canopy of some bigger trees, which sucked up all the moisture. I mean, I just did everything wrong. So this is beautiful, and you can see it start to change color. This is Disanthus also. This is a parking lot planting at the Coastal Maine Botanical Garden. Full sun. I have no idea how they're getting this to survive because it's getting all the elements crashing on it. And ours survive because we baby them, you know, we have them protected. But these are parking lot plants there. However, this is August, and if you look carefully, the foliage is already starting to redden up, besides this one leaf. So the plants are under a whole lot of stress, and individual leaves on this plant had already fully turned. Okay, this is a great plant. Acer japonicum, aconitifolium, the cut leaf full moon maple, totally dependable fall color every year, this wonderful orange to red fall color, and it's small. I've had mine in the ground for years, literally, 15 years or so. It started out growing rather shrubby. Now it's a multi-stem small tree, but it's maybe 6 feet tall at the largest. And if it keeps growing, it might get up to 8 feet tall. It's not going to grow big. It's hardier than Japanese maples. So if you have a really exposed spot, it's a good,
Which cultivar is that?
aconitifolium. And we have a plant list that will have all of those on there. So this is one border of my house, and I just want to show you that you can have a strategy to prolong fall color by choosing your cultivars carefully. This is Mary's house back there. So I wanted some big trees. So this is a sugar maple, and the cultivar of this is gold spire, though I'm not sure it really is a gold spire because it's not quite as narrow as many gold spires are. And this is a red maple. Well, most red maples color up, like the species red maple. Even before the sugar maples, they come on really fast. But this is the cultivar October Glory, and it's the last red maple to turn. For that reason, it's popular in the South, but up here, you can use it to prolong your fall interest. So here, as this starts to go by, the red maple has its color. So this will be completely gone in a couple days, but this will linger for probably another week or so. So I have stretched out that color interest through the month of October. You think about color change and fall and winter color with deciduous plants, but conifers can change color too. And I think that is an important thing to know when you're buying an evergreen plant, because if you buy something because you want it to look this way in the winter, you don't know for sure. You have to ask the question because people at the nursery will be well informed. This is Russian arborvitae. It's a ground cover, hardy to zone 2, so I mean you can grow it in Alaska. That's the winter color. It looks nothing like the summer color. It's this purple plummy at its best. At its worst, it is kind of a bronzy, greeny brown. Here it looks nice because it's grown over a wall under winter berries, so it's pretty striking. But once those berries drop, and before this is covered with snow, that's what you're going to have.
And what did you say that was?
That's Russian arborvitae. Did you find that? Yeah. And this one is Chief Joseph lodgepole pine. And again, there is a dramatic color change. This is the summer color. It's a greeny yellow. And this is the winter color, which is squash yellow. Just, I have it in my garden. You're growing it now, aren't you? Did yours turn squash yellow?
It's yellow. When the sun shines on it, it's spectacular.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the snow, it just comes up like a beacon. And it's a tiny plant. This one's fairly big. This is at Isley. And, but, oh my goodness, the color is breathtaking in the winter against the snow and in the sunlight. It only grows at maturity to about 8 feet tall. It's very slow growing. If you look at lodgepole pines out west where they're native, you know, they're huge, huge trees. But this is a little one. Another plant that changes in the winter is creeping juniper. The Juniperus horizontalis, that particular species can really change. This is lime glow. It has kind of a spreading vase shape. And in the winter, it becomes green on the inside and a pinky bronze outside. Mother lode is another creeping juniper, very, very short, about 2 inches tall, wonderful for walls. The fall and winter color, once it's cold, is also beautiful. It's green, tipped with bronze, a pinky bronze. Here is Jade River. That's another creeping juniper with a dwarf Norway spruce. Picea abies elegans. I like this because we really haven't looked at blue foliage, and this gives you a sense of blue in the garden, and it does look like a blue river. It does have some color change. It takes on plummy tints in the winter. This is an amazing tree in my yard. It's not that the tree itself is so beautiful, but the foliage is incredible. It's Pinus strobus, so it's our native white pine, but the cultivar is Torreolosa, so it's the twisted white pine. Everything is twisted. The stems are twisted, the foliage twists around, and if you look at white pine needles, they have a little white stripe on the back. So by twisting it, you're seeing some of the white on top. It twists all the way over, so you still see some of the green, and the effect in the landscape is that it looks bluish. It looks blue-green. This is Korean fir silverlock. There's silver foliage in the garden too, and that can be really striking. Here it's planted in a container next to a house with gray cedar siding, so it's quite striking. What makes that silver, this Korean fir actually has dark green needles, but these, like a white pine, they have white or silver on the back, but these needles recurve, so the green is hidden from view. So it's really a striking plant. Variegated plants have a whole different effect in the garden. And you can really have fun using them, but you need to use them a little cautiously because too much variegation in one spot can really overwhelm an area. This, well, first, does anyone know this is forsythia, believe it or not? But unlike those giant forsythias that people buy that grow 9 feet tall and 12 feet wide and keep going, which I love, by the way, but I love them like a purple beech, planted far from the house. Because when you plant a really big tree or shrub close to the house, it means you have to prune it so it becomes a high maintenance plant. And it takes away the natural habit. And the one thing about a big forsythia is that its natural growth habit is like a fountain. It's really elegant and graceful. But if you prune it and have to cut it back a lot, it won't be that graceful. So this, if you like forsythia, but want something interesting for more than 2 weeks of bloom, a variegated leaf one called Fiesta, which only grows about 2.5 feet tall and 3 feet wide. It's small enough to put in a foundation or in a border. Here you see it with Solomon's seal. And you have the foliage all season long, but its growth is kicked off by these copious yellow forsythia blossoms. So this is great because if you like forsythia, it extends the interest of the plant through the growing season. Rainbow drooping leucophilate. This is taken later in the summer. The stems are red, and when the foliage is in the spring, it's flushed with copper and pink, as well as cream and green. The copper and pink fade away as the season goes on, but this is a broadleaf evergreen. Now, I planted mine. I did not protect it at all. I planted it out in the sun by a big rock, and it gets absolutely beaten in the winter. And so I just cut it back, and the foliage comes up again, and it's beautiful. This is the Japanese red pine. The cultivar is Oculus draconis, or dragon's eye. Here you can see it against the snow. The contrast is absolutely beautiful. And in a landscape, it looks like this, a light green that just floats. So it is quite stunning. And it has, the tree has red bark, so it's often pruned up so you can see the bark and the wonderful layers of growth. Similarly, in a deciduous plant, this is giant dogwood, and the cultivar, it's Cornus controversa, and the cultivar is variegata. Variegata is not as gigantic as the species giant dogwood, which grows 45 feet tall. This will top out around 25 feet. And underneath, you have this gardener planted variegated hostas. So this is her variegated corner, and she's having fun, and that's great. I think if it were me, I would keep these trees and just have all the attention on them because they're so phenomenal looking. Here we have the tricolor beech. It is a wonderful plant. You have to put it in partial shade, and the color only lasts for until late July. By late July, those leaves around the edges are looking pretty nasty, but it's a beautiful, beautiful plant, and I am glad I grow it. This is a branch sport from that called bicolor sartini, and we grow this in full sun. And I took this photograph at the end of October, And you can see that those leaves are still full of substance and really, as I say, in full sun. So it's a much stronger, tougher plant than the tricolor. But here is the tricolor in the landscape, and it is absolutely gorgeous because instead of a big hole in the landscape like a purple tree would do, this creates a rosy colored accent, which is magnificent. Next to it, I'm not sure you can see it, but it's right here, is the twisted pine, white pine. These are native white pines back here, and you can see they're a darker green, but by twisting that foliage, it looks blue. Green is a color, and we can't ignore it in the garden because most of our environment is green in the summer, and it's gorgeous. Here is a topiary from Longwood Gardens. It's a yew, which is deer food down there and deer food up here. However, this is covered in bird netting, very subtly so you don't see it, but it's completely covered. Topiary, because of its geometric forms, is excellent as a transitional plant from a building like a house into a wilder landscape because it keeps the geometry, the stiff geometry that you find in a building. Here, these are Rocky Mountain junipers. The cultivar is Wichita blue. There are 4 of them that anchor the ends of this. It's a sundial garden, that's the focal point, and this is a pleached seckel pear in LA. Without these, this really would not have a strong effect as a garden in winter, but their strong, upright forms really do anchor the entire garden, so you have 4 seasons of interest here.
And how large do they get?
Those get about 25 to 30 feet, I believe.
And that's the Wichita blue?
Yeah, yes. And that's the Colorado blue spruce. And this is arborvitae, and it just shows you that a very ordinary evergreen can do amazing things in the landscape in winter. Here it is silhouetted against, a sculpture is silhouetted against it, and it would not exist in this snowy landscape without the dark backdrop. Finally, I want to show you that we have looked at all sorts of strategies for using foliage, but nature comes up with some great combinations too. And this is monochromatic. It is a Cyadopetus covered with frost against a birch and a gray house. So if you're just aware when you walk outside, there is beauty all around you. And right now, my Hamamelis pallida is blooming, and the Hamamelis vernalis. So spring is just around the corner, March 20th. And if you have any questions, I can answer them after Cameron speaks, or I could answer maybe a couple right now. Or I will be here, so if you want to come up and talk to me afterwards.
And my red one just came into bloom.
Did it?
Oh, I'm so excited. I bought it here.
Yes.
So
I
excited.
love
Oh, it looks good with the snow.
Great. Thank you.